What's up, guys? You may recognize this video. It's kind of similar to my Foreman 500 Rubicon $5 2-inch lift. This is the Pioneer version. Pretty much the same thing. It works great. I'm running 32s now. Let me just draw your attention to this title page. I've updated almost everything in here, so take a look. New promo codes if you're going to use them for the Demon axles. And also I got my contact information on here so people can reach out to me more conveniently to schedule gear reductions, lift kits, snorkel jobs, whatever you guys need. And of course, check out the Patreon page if you like this stuff. Number one, all this stuff goes on Patreon like a week or two before it ends up on YouTube. And also a lot of videos just to Patreon. All right, guys, here's how to add some lift to the front of your Pioneer for free. Maybe a couple dollars if you don't have stuff laying around. I used to have the Rough Country bracket lift on it, and it was bending and it was junk, so I threw it in the trash. And now I'm just making some spring spacers. Of course, you can buy these spring spacers for $100, or you can make them yourself. I've used this method on a bunch of different side-by-sides and foilers. It works great. Never had it fail. So in the rear on this Deluxe, you do have adjustable preload on the shock. So I'm just gonna crank that up so the rear is easy. The front doesn't have adjustable preload, so you gotta do some work. So first I disassembled the front shock with the Death Trap Harbor Freight spring compressor, and it looks pretty good, right? You got a nice big bump stop in here. There's your shock. On the bottom, you have the keeper, which is kind of pressed on there. You have this washer, and on the top, you have the top keeper, which is this that comes off, and you have this isolator. Now, here's the spacer I made. The way I made this spacer was I took a 2-inch coupler, cut it in half, as you can see. I cut it with a handsaw, and then I cut a piece of this pipe, stuck it in there, glued it, let it harden, and then I took on the driveway and went and I got it pretty flat to where the two surfaces are nice and flat. This is the perfect size spacer for a lot of different shocks, and it works great on the Pioneer 1000 front as well. So here's how tall the spacer is. It's about 1.25 inches. And so 1.25 inches preload with the motion ratio and everything, probably 1.5 inches, maybe 1.75 inches of lift. We will find out shortly. But because it has this nice washer, we're gonna use that to keep even pressure on the PVC. I did go in and kind of chamfer. You can see the chamfer on there, the inside of that one. I used that burr. So this fits really nice down on there. You don't really have to do that. You could just hammer it. And then you put that on there. You have to center it once the spring gets on it. And the spring will sit against that. The reason you don't want the spring sitting directly against the PVC is because there's a gap here, right? So you won't have even pressure on the PVC. This washer kind of helps with that. You could put the spacer, you could do something like this. Put the washer there and the spacer here. That would probably work just fine, and it keeps the spacer centered better and the washer centered. You could also put the spacer on the top. You could put the spacer over this thing. Yeah, so you have some options here. The way I decided to do it was just to give the PVC the best possible chance of surviving. So you can see that this is almost the full thickness. So the way I decided to do it was go like this, and then have the washer, and just have to center it manually, and then the spring. But yeah, there's a couple different ways you could do this. I'm sure they'll all work fine. And then you just kind of manually center that on there. Once the preload's on it, it's not gonna move around. It really keep it self-centered. And boom, you got your lift. Yes, a bunch of companies sell aluminum spacers for $100 to do the same thing. You can do it for free. PVC is extremely strong, especially when it's in compression like that. That's not gonna fail. So now I just gotta throw this on. Get that around the bump stop in there. And then I gotta put the keeper on. As you can see, I gotta compress it down a little bit more to get the keeper on. I need 2 hands to do that. But pretty simple, and I'm gonna throw it on there, and I'm gonna have a lot more lift in the front. This is the same thing that you do on like a Talon when you just increase the preload with the rings. And the more suspension travel you have, the less you will feel additional preload. So you'll probably feel a little bit on the Pioneer, especially when it lifts a wheel. You're gonna get a little bit of jolt when that wheel contacts the ground because you're adding more initial preload into the system. But it's a free lift, and it's more reliable than the Rough Country crap. All right, so there it is, all installed. As you can see, I did not paint it, and I made it where you can see the barcode. That way everyone can know how ghetto I am with my PVC lift kit. So one good thing about this type of lift is it doesn't increase your max down travel angle, which means the max angle on your CV remains stock. So it should help protect your front CV joints, unlike the bracket lift. And yeah, it's free. So yeah, there it is. It's not even perfectly flat, and I just looked at it. This side's a little fatter than that side, but the spring is sitting on there pretty straight and it's not contacting anything. Yeah, just make sure when you get it all done, you get everything fairly centered, you know, because you can wiggle the spring around a little bit now. But yeah, it looks good. Now I just got to do the other side. We measured it. It's about 1 3/4, maybe 1 7/8 inches taller. Makes the ground clearance look a lot more formidable, even on these 28-inch tires. And I do have the Atlas Pro forward arms with a nice rake in there, so that looks good too. But yeah, now I got to crank up the rear preload because it's sitting kind of high in the front. So the rear is very simple on my Deluxe. I just pulled off the tire, sprayed some PB Blaster on the shock, and then grabbed it with a pair of channel locks and maxed out the rear preload adjuster. Now, if you don't have a Deluxe or you want more lift than this, you could do the exact same thing we did up front on the back. I'm not going to bother with it. Maybe I'll do it eventually. Depends how it rides. If the back's sagging, I might go ahead and put more preload back there. I don't usually have a ton of weight in the bed when I'm doing trails, and the rear spring rate is pretty heavy, so I'm going to try it just like that with a maxed out factory preload in the rear and then the 1 1/4 spacers in the front. So I figured I did the lift on the front and the forward arms. Let's see how the 32 Aztecs fit. And as you can see, they're not rubbing the plastics at full lock, but they are rubbing the control arm because these control arms are stupid. Now, of course, once the tires flex up into the wheel well, there's going to be some rubbing. These wheels are 5 + 2 inch offset, so a little skinnier than most of you guys run. So, you know, we'll give it a shot, see how it goes. Set it down and see how, yeah, once it squats down a little bit, it's going to look pretty good. All right, so there's how it sits. I went with my 32-inch Aztecs. They were rubbing a lot, but now with the PVC spring spacer lift, the rubbing is minimal with the 1.5-inch forward arms, the Atlas Pro arms. So got the 32s on there. I need to set the PSI. They're a little high. I'm going to put them at 5 PSI all the way around to minimize the rubbing. And they look pretty good. There's plenty of clearance in the rear. Won't have any rubbing back here. Just rubbing in the front when steering hard and flexing. But the ground clearance looks pretty good. So I forgot to mention in this recording, but I did add 1-inch wheel spacers all the way around. You can see that in this clip. It's a little wider than the last clip. It helped with the rubbing up front just slightly. We'll manage. So in the front, we're looking at about 17 at the lowest part, 17 inches of ground clearance, which is awesome for not having portals. And in the rear, probably a little more than that, I'm hoping. Oh, also 17, actually probably 16.5 in the rear. The skid plate's hanging down a little bit, but so yeah, actually have more clearance in the front than the rear, and that's because the front has the bigger preload spacers. The back has about 3/4 inch of preload with a factory adjuster. This has 1 1/4 inch. I also have a bunch of crap in the bed, so maybe that's why too. But that's pretty decent ground clearance for a stock-ish machine that isn't all weighed down with portals. So that'll be pretty fun at Hole Paul this weekend. Got my tall snorkel on there so we can go deep. And then the 33-inch Aztecs are going to go on this guy. I got to go get them from my friend Chrissy Brown. She was borrowing them on her Talon. As you can see, the stock 28s look like they don't fit anymore because those forward arms are so